Hi everybody, my name is Lauren and welcome to the Omnivorous Bookworm. This is the week 1 check-in for the Asian Readathon for 2021, or I think it's one day after week, but anyway. So this week has been a lot of extremes. I feel like it's been like all highs and lows and not as much in between. So I've read 2 books, so 2 complete books and part of another book so far. So I've read 1 book I DNF'd, the next book I gave 5 stars, and then I'm in the middle of my 3rd book. So please like and subscribe, and yeah, because I'm a new channel and it really helps me a lot. I love it when I see that somebody subscribed. I'm like, yay! Okay, so the first book I DNF'd, and I'm kind of sad about it, but kind of not. So the name of the book was The Question of Red by Lakshmi Pamuchak, and it is Indonesian. The author's Indonesian. It takes place in Indonesia. It doesn't have anything to do with the US that I saw, so it could be a good book for that. But I just felt like, I don't know, I didn't feel like it was a bad book, but I mean, there's books for everybody, right? So I don't like to say bad or good. But it just felt like it wasn't for me, and not for me like really at this time. There were some things that I liked about it. So it opens up, it talks about the island of Buru, which is where I guess a lot of the story takes place at different points in time. And then it goes into this sort of mythological story about Amba and the Indonesian version of that story, as well as sort of the differences between different cultures that share that same story. And then there's like 4 different parts. So I read the first part, and that's why I kind of kept reading, because I felt, because each part is in a different time period. So the first part is in the year 2006, when the main character Amba is like in her 60s, and then the second part goes back in time to the 1950s and the 1960s. And so I kind of kept reading because I was like, well, I need to give this book a chance. But I was just getting to the point where I didn't want to read it. I was kind of getting slumpy. I wasn't really wanting to read. And when I get like that, every single time I feel like I start to get like that, but I'm like, I can push through. I can push through. And then I start to get slumpy, and then I'm like, why am I doing this? This is supposed to be fun. Like, this is not supposed to be school. Like, I finished school. So yeah, I feel like a lot of literary fiction, for me, I struggle with this, in that there seems to be a lot of distance between the reader and the main character, or whatever character we're following. And in this particular book, part of my problem was I felt like things were being withheld, like information was being withheld, but I didn't, there might have been a good reason for it, but I just personally was starting to get the feeling like there's too much that's being withheld that doesn't seem to have a point to why it's being withheld. And it was hard for me to care about what was happening. There wasn't a lot happening as far as plot, which usually I'm okay with, but it was just everything combined, like the slowness of the pace, not really understanding what was happening or who somebody was. We were kind of following different people at different times. And I don't know, it was just kind of slow and sort of like dark, but not dark in like a thriller way, it was dark in like a literary way, which is also okay. But it was just sort of that like sort of dark plotting sort of pace. And I just, at this point right now, I just didn't, like this last week we had like where I live in Mexico City, like the metro collapsed, and one of the bridges, and it's just been like a lot of sad news stories, and I'm just like, I want to kind of escape into my reading right now. So I just decided, like, well, it's not fair to the book, and it's not fair to me. Like, I'm not going to end up giving this book a good rating, and so maybe I just pick it up at a time when if I'm more in that mood. So I decided to DNF it. The next book I read and I finished was The Impossible Girl by Lydia Kong. And that book I gave 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. It's the second book I've read by Lydia Kong, and it was available on Kindle Unlimited, the audio as well. So I really liked it. The main character, in this book, the author is Asian American, and then the main character also has Chinese heritage. And it takes place in 1850 in Manhattan. And we follow this young woman who her job is to collect bodies of people who have died and take them to either the medical establishment or basically whoever's willing to pay for it. There's sort of this idea that, like, they don't go into Barnum and Bailey, like the circus, but there's some guy kind of like that has like the circus freaks, and she's selling bodies to them as well. And she dresses up as a man, as well as she's a biological woman and identifies as such, but she dresses up as a man to like actually dig up the bodies, and then she dresses as a woman to like go to funerals and kind of see what sort of protections the family has put in place, because obviously people at this time knew that this might happen, so they were sort of putting those safeguards into place. And this young woman was born with 2 hearts, and so she also knows that she has this sort of kindred feeling towards these people, because she also has like a medical condition, and she has this list of people who have these strange medical conditions, and so she knows that they have these medical conditions, and then if they die, she can like go and get their body. Obviously she doesn't want them to die, but she's aware of whatever weird medical condition that they might have, but she knows that she's also one of these people. And so it gets into a lot of that is very interesting as far as the ethics of it. She wrestles with the ethics of it herself, which I think is really interesting and helpful to see as a main character. And also the idea that her Chinese heritage plays in the people's minds, plays a factor into why she has this medical condition, because a lot of people in New York at this time felt like, oh, it's so exotic and she's Chinese, and there was like a couple of Chinese, they would have conjoined twins, those Siamese twins, and so that was this idea that because somebody might have non-European ancestry, that they would be more likely to have these weird medical conditions, and that's sort of discussed as well in the book, which is really interesting. I really appreciate it at the end of the book that the author talks about the history, talks about like what was happening at this time, why she included certain things, the parts of the book that are real, and it also gets into like what avenues women would have had to work in medicine at this time. So it's basically like, be a midwife, maybe work at a pharmacist shop, especially if your husband was a pharmacist. And then there were women who like also would have sort of been scouting these bodies at funerals. But past that, there, also to be a nurse, but of course you couldn't get married. So past that, there was not a lot of avenues for you. In the book, there is a true story of a female doctor, but she's looked upon with a lot of distrust, a lot of animosity. So it's very interesting because the book is also written by a doctor. So she gets all the anatomy right when she's talking about the dead bodies. All of that stuff is very obviously spot on. And it just goes into the ethics of, how do we study science, the history of how science has been studied. And the author talks about that and it's talked about in the book as well, that traditionally back in the day, dead bodies were just taken from poor people or people who had been enslaved, and their bodies were not treated with respect. It was just taken as a given, and so even in death they didn't have that respect for their body. And and how we can sort of wrestle with these ethics even to this day, as far as, yes, we need these things to study, and incoming doctors, we need them to be able to study, but we also need to respect the ideas and wishes of those whose bodies we're using, as well as their families. And so all of that gets into, and the book itself is very much a thriller mystery, very fast paced. It gets pretty dark and pretty explicit. Like there's a lot of body horror, and yeah, there's a lot of like content warnings as far as that stuff goes. But I didn't feel, for me personally, I didn't feel like it was over the top. Like everything felt like it needed to be there for the plot. But yeah, the plot is very fast paced, very interesting, and I guess that's why I really enjoy Lydia Kong's books, at least the two that I've read so far, is that the plot is very interesting, very exciting, very like fast paced. The characterization is well done, but and then she also, even while doing those fast paced themes, is getting into a lot of historical or fast paced plot. She's getting into a lot of these historical themes, ethics, a lot of these like deeper issues, while at the same time, you know, giving you that sort of like thriller, mystery, fast-paced, I can't talk today, plot. So that book I absolutely love. So it was like I went from like a low to like, whew, this is really good. I really like this. And I think I kind of knew that was going to happen. So it was just like another reminder of like listen to yourself, because like you go into those books feeling like I should like this book, but I'm not in the mood for it, and then I start reading it. I'm like, no, I know I don't like. It's not always the book's fault. It's my fault. So the last book that I have not finished it's The Reason Why I Jump, is the English translation by Naoki Higashida, and I'm reading the Spanish translation, which is La Razón por la que Salto, because it's free on Kindle Unlimited. So this book is, I thought it was a memoir of a 13-year-old boy with autism. It was written in 2006, but at the time that he wrote it, I think 2006, it was written in kind of the early 2000s. But at the time that he wrote it, he was 13. So I'll just refer to him as 13 because that's the book. Obviously, he's not 13 now. Like, he's an adult now. But I went into thinking it was a memoir, but it's really more like it's a bunch of questions, and then he's answering the question. And all of the questions are like, why do autistic people do this thing? And it's like, insert thing I think is weird here. Like, basically, and I find it interesting because I like to hear someone's perspective of how they experience the world. Like I find that part interesting. It makes me feel uncomfortable because, you know, one, he's 13, and then two, it's like, I don't know, and I don't mean anything against like the people who are asking him these questions. I don't know what the history was with that. And I definitely don't mean anything against this young man because he was a child at the time. And I do think like overall it's helpful because it's going to provide, anything that provides people with more empathy is always a good thing in my book. But it just is uncomfortable because I just keep, the whole time I'm reading it, I can't read it for a long time because I just keep thinking, okay, so why don't you turn around and ask other people, like, why does this bother you? Why do you care? Like, you know, if they ask him, like, why do, you know, autistic people flap their hands? And it's like, why do you care that they're flapping their, like, I just feel like, why is it the burden is always on somebody to explain themselves who appears, like, different? And a lot of his answers is like, it's just the human experience. We all experience things in different ways. Obviously, if someone has autism, and there's a large, you know, it's a spectrum of autism, every individual is going to be different. But like every person is different. Every human being is different. Like, I don't know. It just makes me uncomfortable, and it makes me feel, I don't know, it brings up a lot of memories for me because like, you know, I'm visually impaired, and I guess a child, especially because people feel like they can say anything to children, you know, I had to wear like dark sunglasses outside, and I would always get people, and even as an adult, people would say, oh, why are you wearing glasses inside? Why are you wearing sunglasses? You don't need sunglasses. And it made me so uncomfortable that I would prefer to be like in pain than to be wearing like sunglasses. And you know, I looking back and even now, I'm just like, who cares? Like, it doesn't affect you if I wear, you know, sunglasses. And it's the same thing with like, why do people care? Like, if an autistic person wants to stim, if that makes them to feel comfortable, go for it. Like, I don't, it doesn't bother me. Like why can't we just like accept people for, I guess that's, I just keep feeling like, oh my gosh, like why can't, I mean, it's great to be interested, I feel like, in other people's experiences and how they experience the world. Like I said, that part, I'm like, okay, that's great. But I guess it's just the way that the questions are asked. Maybe that's more of it, is just like, oh, like, and I guess the age as well is just a little bit, makes me feel uncomfortable when I'm reading it. I don't really know the history of this book or how it was conceived or any of that, if there was controversy about it when it came out. So I'm just taking the book at face value. Like, I'm just reading it like as it appears. So I have no knowledge of any of that. So far, I mean, I do find it interesting when he starts to get into stuff. There's one part that it just breaks your heart because they ask him, like, the question is sort of like, and the answers to the questions are very short, but they ask him like, how is it hard to be autistic? And this young boy, I should have said before, he's nonverbal, so he's answering all these questions using like an alphabet grid. And he talks about, yeah, you know, it is really hard to be autistic, and he sort of says that, like, how difficult it is. But then everything he lists about what's difficult is how other people treat him, how other people perceive him. And it's just like, oh, it just, you know, it just breaks your heart, because obviously, you know, having any kind of condition or disability, you know, can make your life harder. But then when people pile on top of that, it's like, it's probably already frustrating. You know, I don't know personally, but if you're nonverbal, I would assume that that's a frustrating experience. So like, why are people rude? Why do people treat you like you're stupid? Like, why can't we just treat each other, you know, as human beings? It's just very, I don't know. That part is just, it's very frustrating to me. So I keep reading it, like reading like a few questions and like, oh, I want to tear out my hair or like cry or something for this young man. And then I'm just like, okay, let me just read something like a little bit happier. But it is really interesting. Like, obviously it's just his experience. It's not, that's the other thing, is they're like, why do autistic people do X, Y, and Z? And it's like, well, all he can tell you is himself. He's not in all autistic people's heads. Like, even for me, like, one thing I've learned, because I've never met somebody who has my exact, you know, visual impairment until I was like online. And even though it's really, really rare, all of us have like different ways of seeing. Some of us are, like, for me personally, I'm glad I'm visually impaired. I wouldn't want to change it. Other people would love to change it. Like, it, and that's something physical. It's something physical and very like specific. You know, if you, as soon as you start talking about neurological conditions or anything with the brain, is so complicated. It's just like, you cannot make these like generalizations about people. It's just, doesn't work like that. But anyway, that was the other thing. Because I saw criticism that the boy, because when I first was interested in the book, I saw criticisms that the boy was like answering for all autistic people. But the reason he's doing that is because that's how the questions are kind of worded. And, you know, I'm sure he's just like, well, this is my experience. So, you know, and I'm autistic, so that's what he's sharing. I don't know. I just found that, I think the parts that are the most interesting is when there's like a few parts where he kind of just talks about himself, or when he answers the questions and talks about himself. And I guess I wish it were kind of like a memoir as far as that goes, and just, you know, to learn from his personal experience and his family. And like, I don't know. And I feel, as a somebody who studies languages and like second language acquisition, I find like the alphabet grid part of it like really interesting, like how different languages are, like, and how languages are used. So I don't know, I feel like that would have been more, but I think that's just me. I don't think most people are interested in like that stuff. But anyway, so I'm interested to see if how my experience continues with that book. I will let you know. this was my first week check-in, but I feel like it's successful, this Asian Readathon so far, in that it's doing what it's supposed to do. Like, I'm trying authors that I probably wouldn't have tried otherwise. Reading books maybe, and I tried to pick genres and types of books that maybe I wouldn't, that seemed interesting, but maybe I wouldn't normally pick up, to just kind of like push myself a little bit and maybe find something new. And whenever you do that, like, you're gonna find stuff you like and you're gonna find stuff you don't like, and it's still like a win-win, because it helps you to understand why you didn't like it or why it's not working for you. And my goal has been to be able to DNF more, because I've struggled with that. And I feel like, yeah, and I finally made peace with it, because I'm like, it's not fair to the book. If I push myself to read it, I'm unhappy, and it's more likely I'm not going to give the book a high rating, because my experience is not going to be enjoyable. So like, I'm doing a favor to the book, like, because I felt guilty before, so like, yes, I'm helping. So that's how I just, but I mean, it's true. Like, if you're reading for fun, and it's not, it's not have to be fun for me, but if it's like getting to the point where this is just not working for me, I feel like that's a success. To DNF something is not it's not something bad. It's something good that I've chosen to do for the book and for myself. So that has been my experience this week. I will check in with you later to let you know how the Asian Readathon is going, and I will see you next time. Bye.